Hey, this is video 81, and this topic is all about managing organisational change. I just realised I've got my woolen hat on, and the reason I've got my woolen hat on is because I'm absolutely freezing. My wife's only given me a very small heater for the room. Anyway, this particular topic area is managing organisational change. Now, Hofstede's cultural dimensions theory. Now, this is a big step up from the old AQA syllabus, managing change, but Hofstede did a really good study in the 1970s on the values that people held in different countries when they were working for IBM. And we're going to study that, his sort of 6 takes on personality traits across the whole world. So this is a framework for cross-cultural communication. So if you're working for an international company, then we really ought to be studying this theory, because we want to be able to understand culture. And it's a very important subject. Do we understand the culture of the people in Afghanistan? If we had, maybe we would have conducted the war in a slightly different way from the way in which we did it. World Survey of IBM, employees' values in 1960s, 1970s. The theory was one of the first that could be quantified, and what that means is that they did some thorough research into it, produced lots of documentation, and could be used to explain observed differences between countries. So, for example, I'll just give you one example now, just to get your head around it before we look at the bigger picture, is the idea of individualism. And obviously America is a very individualistic society, whereas on the other extreme, Guatemala is not individualistic. So why is this relevant? Because if you're an American company and you want to move to Guatemala, then you have to understand the culture that exists within Guatemala, because you're going to be employing people from Guatemala. So you have to maybe approach the way in which your organisation runs in a slightly different way from the way in which we would run it in America. So this is what this part of the course is all about. It's all about culture, country's culture, and the way in which we can handle that, and also organisational culture as well. Thank you. So here we have Hofstede's cultural dimensions, and these are the first 3 on here: the power distance index, the individualism versus collectivism, and uncertainty avoidance index. Right, the power distance index. That is all about how willing people in a country are to accept inequality or unequal distributions of power within that country. Now, what you tend to find is that it's high for Africa and the Arab states. So people are quite happy to accept the fact that a certain elite in society are at the top, whereas Sweden and the UK and Israel in particular are extremely low. So they will not accept power structures that are inherently perhaps a little bit unfair. Okay, so the power distant index. Now, all these scores always go from 1 to 120. So if you're like 120 on this one, that means that people are willing to accept an unequal distribution of power within that country. The next one is pretty easy to understand, which is individualism versus collectivism. And in this one, we've got North America and Europe. They're pretty high in terms of individualism, that you should go out there and you should go out there and do it. Whereas collectivism is far stronger in places like Africa, South America, where it's all about the extended family, and you look and work for the extended family and you look after them, and then the deal is that they will also look after you. So that also has a strong impact upon how a firm works. And lastly on here, there are 6 in total, and this is the third one on this board, is the uncertainty avoidance index. And this is all about whether or not people are willing or not to accept change and happy to accept change. So actually we find some quite interesting scores here, is that the Germans generally do not like change. They are less tolerant of change. I should know because I'm married to one. She's half German actually, so maybe that half Germanic part of her is less willing to accept change. Denmark likes change, and they're right beside Germany, but they're quite happy to embrace change. Maybe that's probably why they've gone down the green technology route, maybe. Denmark and Sweden. The UK and China actually score low marks here. So as a people, then we are willing to accept change, as is China. But however, Southern and Eastern Europe Germany and Japan, the uncertainty avoidance index, they are not so willing to accept major change within their communities. So this tells us quite a lot. If you're a business going into a country and say you want to go into Africa, then you have to accept the way in which their power structures are, and you have to accept the way that they're much more collective in the way that they feel. They're much less individualistic, which has advantages and disadvantages to those places on there. So this is Hofstede's Cultural Dimensions Index. We've done the first three. I'm pretty sure the next one is about masculinity and femininity. Okay, thank you. Organisational culture, and we're still looking at Hofstede's 6 ways of looking at culture across countries, and we're just going to do a quick one on here, which is masculinity versus femininity. Now, they've actually changed this around to quantity of life versus quality of life, because obviously people think that saying you're masculine maybe is that there's some gender bias or whatever. Now, but the masculine values are competitiveness, assertiveness, materialism, and let's go get it. Whereas the feminine cultures are all about relationships and about the quality of life. Okay, so an interesting country here happens to be Sweden, that happens to doesn't mind uncertainty and is willing to accept change. Sorry, I've just realised I'm so cold, I've got my hat on. So I'm going to chuck this away and carry on. And Sweden, but it's a very modest country, and it's also a very caring country as well. So maybe that's why it's good to go and live in Sweden. So Norway and Sweden are low in terms of that. The more masculine societies happen to be Japan, Sweden and Hungary, and also the UK. So they are competitive, and they like materialism, and they are assertive in terms of what they want to do. The interesting place here is Latin America, where some countries are very masculine and some countries are very feminine. So it's just another one of those things. So we've got the power distance index, individualism versus collectivism, and the uncertainty avoidance score as well. So this is the fourth one. The next two are ones that he didn't originally bring about, but as time progressed, he eventually put them into his 6 cultural differences between nations. Thank you. 81, managing organisational culture. And we've got 2 left on here. We've got long-term orientation and indulgence versus restraint. Once I've done all this, I'm going to look at why all these differences are important and give you some practical examples of them. But the long-term orientation is, well, this came about because of Confucian dynamism, which is where some people are very long-term orientated. So therefore they're willing to save money, they're willing for persistent saving, they're also willing to adapt to make sure that they achieve their long-term goals. So very much the Chinese score very, very highly in this area. Whereas some countries are much more short-term. They're much more based on tradition, fulfilling social obligations, a bit more like the UK, for example. So basically, this was added because the Chinese are willing to save to make sure that they can produce more in the future. The last one on here, which has also been added on, I think it was in 2010 by Hofstede, was indulgence versus restraint. And that's the extent to which some countries are willing to indulge themselves. So therefore, Latin America enjoys life and likes having fun. So that's how they believe their society should be. Whereas East Asia, Eastern Europe, the Muslim world has on strict norms because they feel they need to control society more. So they've also got indulgence versus restraint. So Hofstede's model is looking at all of these different things on here. Thank you. Between Africa and Asia, you need to learn how they work in terms of what they want to do. Okay. So, for instance, in Mediterranean countries have high levels of acceptance of inequalities, uncertainty aversion, and mildly individualistic. So that will help your firm understand how they're going to behave in those countries. Picked up this quote, and it says here that culture is more often a source of conflict rather than synergy. cultural differences are a nuisance and at best and often a disaster. So just to say that when firms do join up together, there can be complete cultural differences which can create a problem. Now, we may have thought that due to IT there is a convergence of culture, that cultural aspects are less of a significant role now than they used to because we're in one globalised world and we have the internet and everything else. But this may not be the case. And e.g., they used an example they read about in terms of global branding, mobile phones, e.g. in the USA, when they advertise a mobile phone, they may say, oh well, you know, a mobile phone is going to save you time and money, therefore it's individualistic, whereas a mobile phone in China may well be advertised as more of a collective response. So just be careful when you're looking at different cultures. And even when you're talking to individuals, don't assume that all individuals are related to that particular culture they have in their country. So in the Japanese people, they have a high uncertainty avoidance, but that doesn't mean that when you're talking to the individual in Japan, they may well be a risk taker. So they may themselves go against the norm of their country. So the most important lesson is that this gives us a model by which we can try and understand different cultures at the aggregate level, and it gives you an understanding as to how people may behave in those countries. And I think if you're just aware of that, and if you go to a different country or a different firm, you will try and understand that particular organisation and how that organisation works. Thank you.